This is 5.9, day 2, part 2 for Algebra 2. We have a couple examples left in this lesson. We're going to now divide complex numbers. There's two different scenarios. So this is the first example. When we have a single complex number in the denominator. So in this example we have 8i. The rule is you multiply the numerator and the denominator by the conjugate of the denominator. So if I review for a minute, conjugates, a complex conjugate, you don't need to write this down. If I have 3 plus 5i, then its conjugate is going to be 3 minus 5i. Another example, let's say, is negative 6i. Its conjugate would be 6i. You're changing the sign in front of the imaginary term. All right, so let's go back to this example. We want to divide these two complex numbers, 3 plus 7i, divided by 8i. So let's just first ask, what would be the conjugate, the complex conjugate of 8i? Well, that would be negative 8i. If you have a single complex number in the denominator, then what you do is you multiply the numerator and the denominator, so there's your original problem, by its conjugate. So here's your original fraction, and now here is multiplying the numerator and denominator by its conjugate. So now we have some reducing to do. So I'll give you a minute or so to finish writing up that step. Now we have to clean up the problem by distributing the negative 8i to here and then there. So 3 times negative 8i is negative 24i. And then negative 8i times 7i is negative 56i squared. Then in the denominator, 8i times negative 8i, multiply like parts. So 8 times negative 8 is negative 64. And then I times I is I squared. Now remember, the I squareds can be dropped and then just change the sign. So that negative 56i squared, drop the I squared, change it to a positive 56. And then in the denominator, drop the I squared and change it to a positive 64. Then I have 56 minus 24i over 64, or you can separate that fraction into two fractions. So I have the real part and then the imaginary part. And I'll let you finish those, reducing those fractions down. Here's a second example of dividing complex numbers. It's the same rule. So go ahead and write down example B. We have a complex number 2 plus 5i, and we're dividing it by 1 minus 3i. So again, we have to ask ourselves, what is the complex conjugate of 1 minus 3i? So what the conjugate of that denominator is, change the sign of the imaginary. And that's what we're going to multiply this fraction by. So I'm going to keep the original fraction parentheses. And now I'm going to multiply by its complex conjugate of the denominator. So I'm multiplying by 1 plus 3i and 1 plus 3i. Now this problem's going to get to be pretty long because we have to FOIL the numerator and we have to FOIL the denominator. So be very careful on these. So let's move this over now. So let's start with the numerator. So we multiply 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 3i is 6i. Then we'll distribute the 5i. So 5i times 1 is 5i. And then 5i times 3i is 15i squared. Now let's go down to the denominator. FOIL those. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 3i is 3i. Negative 3i times 1 is negative 3i. And then negative 3i times positive 3i is negative 9i squared. What will always happen when you multiply by complex conjugates is the middle terms will cancel out. Now we have some reducing to do. 2 plus 6i plus 5i is 11i. The I squared can drop out, and it changes it to a negative 15. 1. And then the I squared drops out, and it changes it to a positive 9. Then we add like terms again. 2 minus 15 is negative 13 plus 11i over 10. Now we can split it up into its two fractions. Negative 13 over 10 plus 11i over 10. We're going to save example C to be done together in class tomorrow. And this will be the homework assignment for 5.9, day 2.